Everybody, welcome to Two Out the First. It is March the 14th, 2023. Happy Pi Day. Happy Rollback Day. We are getting a rollback here in golf, and that is going to be the subject of both stories, frankly, of today's show. Special edition of Two Out the First. Everything about the rollback, everything you need to know, thoughts, point of view, perspective, from me at least, what the USGA and the R&A had to say, some thoughts from Titleist and Bridgestone, who have released statements about the proposed rollback, and we'll go over all of that and put it all together in a kind of 20-minute little package that hopefully is easy enough to understand, and then you can hear my point of view, you can hear other people's point of view, and make some decisions for yourself about what the USGA and the R&A have put forth. So, there was some reporting that finally came out about this last night, and the recon work that I was doing on my own reporting finally all kind of came together, and the USGA, at least on this side in the United States and in Mexico, kind of started to peel back what they intend to do as a kind of soft launch of what they were announcing today. And the formal details finally came out in a two-page piece of paper that came out from the USGA and the R&A, a proposed change, a proposed notice is what it's called. And it goes out to equipment manufacturers. It's already been out to them. They got it yesterday for a rules change that will result in what's called a model local rule starting in January of 2026. And a model local rule is basically an optional rule that tournaments and certain participants in golf are expected to use, but they do not have to use. And a model local rule is a little bit above a local rule. Like, your golf course has local rules. Like, you can take a free drop from the doghouse off the 12th green. Like, that is a local rule. That doesn't apply to every golf course, but applies to that one. Model local rules are a little bit broader in their nature. They're a little bit more important. They're a little bit more related to competition, but they're intended to be used by the targeted groups related to it. So this model local rule is supposed to be targeted at elite competition. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, and that's part of the reason why this is a model local rule and isn't an edict to apply to certain types of competition. Because as a local rule, any competition could adopt it. So a professional golf tournament could, a high-level amateur tournament could, collegiate tournament could. They could also not. Your club could choose to do it. You could have a competition where you have to abide by this standard for one tournament or for every tournament. Those things are possible under this proposed model local rule. So it's not a mandate across the board, which creates effectively two sets of equipment standards, one for the people who adopt this model local rule and one for people who don't, which is pretty much everybody else that's probably not elite competition. So what is the change? The change is effectively a model version, a new model of the equipment standard for the best players in the world, for the best golfers in the world who are competing at an elite level in tournament-style golf. And so their equipment, specifically their golf ball, will be measured differently than what you and I would get if we were to have a competition and just play for giggles or on a buddy trip, or if any of that kind of even mattered to you. So the change here is in what's called the overall distance standard and how that relates to standards for equipment and how it performs related to that distance standard. So the USGA said, okay, well, the distance standard, what they call the ODS, the overall distance standard, is 317 yards, plus 3 yards of tolerance. So it's really 320 yards. And that they are going to measure golf balls against that, and have historically measured golf balls against that standard. They are going to then say, for elite level competition, the golf ball can still only go maximum 320 yards, 317 plus 3. But the launch conditions at which they are testing that on a robot will change. So for elite level competition, the robot will now have a club head speed of 127 miles per hour, up from 120, which has been the standard for years. And the launch conditions for that 127 mile per hour club head will be at 11 degrees of loft, 11 degrees of launch, and then 37 revolutions per second, which amounts to 2,220 revolutions per minute. Every other ball for every other competition will meet the existing standard, which is still going to be 317 total yards plus 3, so 320, but that'll be at a different setup with a maximum club head speed of 120 miles per hour, with a launch condition of 10 degrees, and with a spin rate of 42 revolutions per second, or 2,520 RPMs. And that will be how they effectively roll back the ball, because what that will mean is when the USGA and the R&A test golf balls against that higher standard, the ball will not be able to go as far, because you'll still have the 320-yard standard, but you'll be swinging faster. If you swing faster, in this case it would be a 7-mile-per-hour difference, you're talking somewhere in the area of 15 to 20 yards, depending on how you deliver the club and how effectively you hit the ball and what kind of shaft you're using, what kind of spin you impart. But in this set of conditions, effectively they're taking a 12 to 15-yard rollback on the ball, because they're going to have it launch higher, because we know launching it higher can mean more carry, and they're going to have it spin less, which can also mean more carry. So on the actual standard itself, it's going to be something like 12 to 15 yards, which takes you back about 20 years. Takes you back toward the just before, or just after the introduction of the Pro V1, kind of right in that range of the issuance of the solid core golf ball that became popular and has revolutionized golf in so many ways. And then the spin increase, which is 300 RPMs, is not nothing. I mean, that's a significant thing. So that not only has an impact on carry, it also has an impact on rollout, because obviously if the ball spins less, it is going to roll out more. So by increasing or taking RPMs off of the measurement, you're then saying we're going to try to limit rollout as well. Not only carry, but rollout. And that could also have a bigger impact than that kind of 12 to 15 yards, depending on the conditions on the ground at a tournament. How short the grass is cut, how firm the fairways are, how wide they are, all their slopes and movement. So it could have a bigger impact than that, but what they're really shooting for here is 12 to 15 yards. Now, both the governing bodies, they had a news conference today. Mike Wan, who is the CEO of the USGA, was very impressive. Martin Slumbers of the R&A did a great job too, explaining the rationale for this. Why would you do this? And if you're new to this, welcome to the last 20 years of my life. I've been talking about rolling back the golf ball basically since 2003. Been having this kind of argument on and off at different times, because it was evident then that the golf ball was going too far and could jeopardize the value of certain venues to golf, and we'll get to that in a minute, that it could lessen the skill involved in playing golf, and that it could have a detrimental impact on what competitive golf looks like. And they're trying to roll the ball back to make players hit longer clubs into greens. They're going to try to bring back the value of certain shots on certain golf courses. They're going to try to stem off a world where golf courses potentially get longer and have more footprint to host major championships, in a world where the USGA has talked about this repeatedly and kind of been spearheading this with their agronomy work, where water is going to become an increasing issue in this country and around the world for golf. And agronomy practices have to change so that we don't consume as much water, that we have grass types that can handle a different variety of climate conditions as they might be changing around the world. And so with all of that in mind, they're saying we need to kind of draw a line in the sand here now. And not that this is a rollback that's going to be permanent, but an acknowledgement that technology will come along and these equipment manufacturers will figure out ways to make the ball perform better. And they might have to go a generation from now and say, okay, we got to roll it back again. We came too far, we got to come back again. And this might be something that they do repeatedly over the course of the next 50 years or a century, or who knows? I mean, who knows what's going to happen when we're dead. But that seems to be what they're trying to set up here. Now, you've got the equipment manufacturers, and the most vocal of these is Acushnet, right? Acushnet has by far the largest market share of golf balls. They're going to be the one by far most impacted by this, potentially to the downside as they see it. Their stance on this has been pretty consistent over 20 years. I mean, I've had this argument with all kinds of different Acushnet-related people, officially and unofficially, over the last 2 decades. And to their credit, they have been pretty remarkably consistent on this argument, and I've been consistent on mine. But their belief is that equipment standards in golf should be the same between professionals and amateurs or recreational players. Not elite amateurs, but recreational players. And they think this has a negative impact on the game and obviously their bottom line, because they would then not be able to necessarily market to the average consumer that the golf ball, the Titleist Pro V1 or Pro V1X or AVX or whatever ball that you might play if you're a Titleist player, that's the same ball as what Justin Thomas or Jordan Spieth or name your Titleist player uses. That argument kind of falls short. And the reason it falls short is a couple of different reasons. One, Titleist pays people to play their balls. And so does every other equipment manufacturer. I'm not saying they're alone in that regard. But players can be swayed to play other balls based on money. And you can earn bonuses every week just by playing Titleist balls. There's a reason they've held this position for so long. They've invested heavily in tour-based marketing and the Darrell survey, which takes a look at what equipment players are using. And so by being the number one ball on tour, for them, that gives them a marketing advantage, they feel, to the average golfer. So they want to say, hey, look, you're playing their ball, that's the same ball you have. Don't you want to be as good as they are and play our ball? And yes, that is going to potentially have some impact on them. But the truth is, Titleist makes a variety of different Pro V1 and AVX balls that are available only to tour players, only to professional golfers. And up until recently, you couldn't even sniff those. They've sold the left dash ball, which is really a tour ball. And they have another one they don't, at least one other formulation that they don't sell publicly. But they make a variety of different Pro V1s. And some of them are very small run and for a very small set of people. So you may not be playing exactly the same golf ball as the best players in the world because they have their own formulations that might do very specific things that help their game. So while they talk about there not wanting to be confusion, there isn't confusion because not many people know about it. But the reality is there is a difference between the equipment that we play and the equipment that they play. And in thinking about all of those differences, and there are a lot of them, frankly, I mean, shafts, head combinations, I mean, there are prototypes made for tour players that we're never going to see and frankly never going to need in terms of equipment, heads, drivers, irons, wedges, you name it. It's different. Shafts are different. But think about Circle T putters. They're Scotty Cameron's tour issue putters. They're different, right? They're made for better players. They're made for the best in the world. They're custom made. Unless you have expensive taste in an eBay account, those things are hard to find. So you can't necessarily play the same equipment that they play. And I don't think, personally, the equipment professionals play really has an impact on what I play. I play what I play because it works for me. I play what I play because it goes the longest, it goes the straightest, it flies the best, it does what I want to do around the greens, it performs well for me and how I try to play golf. So I'm not personally moved by any equipment choice that a professional makes. Titleist obviously believes the opposite and frankly probably believes their entire business strategy is dependent upon that. I don't necessarily agree with that. Titleist makes incredible equipment. So do other OEMs. But the reason I might play a Pro V1 or a Pro V1X isn't because a professional golfer plays it. It's because it's really good. And I've seen it. I've seen it work really well for me in comparison to other golf balls. And I have other golf balls I like too. But I've figured out over time what I like to play. I don't need someone else to tell me that. So that's kind of one point of view of it. And Titleist is adamant about that they think that this is a mistake to have a lack of unity between, a clear lack of unity, a distinguished line, a bifurcation is what the term has been thrown about for 20, 25 years, in the rules, in the equipment standards between professionals and amateurs. They have Bridgestone Golf who came in and they said something a little bit more even keel, that they have a concern about this, but they are happy that this new model local rule will be targeted to professional golfers and elite players, not amateurs. And maybe they see a market opportunity in being able to market specifically to amateur players, recreational players, and saying, yeah, we don't make golf balls for the elite players. We have those, but our golf balls are made just for you. And that might be an opportunity for them, or for a TaylorMade, or for a Callaway, to change that marketing on its head and see if it works. I mean, Titleist has a product, a company called Union Green, that they created that were direct-to-consumer golf balls that were, and are still marketed as largely for the recreational player. That, hey, you don't need something a tour player uses, you just need something good enough. Use this ball. And they feel like they found some success with that. So maybe there is some room for a universe where golf balls are marketed to amateurs from amateurs. And we've seen some of this in marketing practices from the big OEMs. TaylorMade has foreplay, the Barstool Sports foreplay guys as one of their staffers. I mean, they hawk TaylorMade equipment because they connect with hundreds of thousands of recreational golfers, of amateur golfers. And there's a belief from that company that that association will help them in the long haul. Titleist works with no laying up. They connect with guys that are of varying skill levels but are amateur players. I mean, they're from Solly, who's a plus, to Big Randy. I mean, they're all capable players, but they're not professionals. But they see a value in connecting recreational players with some panache to recreational players who could be potential buyers. All this stuff happens with influencers, and it's a universal thing. And I think there's been this recognition that maybe there's more value in connecting recreational golfers with their favorite influencer type or person they talk to about golf, rather than a professional golfer who's just wearing a logo on a hat or a shirt or a sweater or whatever on the bag. Maybe the connection is a little bit better. And of course, I don't know what the data tells you about that one way or the other, but I don't think that really buys into the argument that because amateurs will no longer play the same thing as professionals, that it will ruin the game. Now, I've gotten some responses on Twitter, and some people said they're kind of upset about this, that they like the notion that they at least could play the same equipment as professional golfers. I mean, they don't, and they never will, but they could. And at least they can't in total. That's never going to happen. The availability is not there. But that thought is important to them, and that them knowing they would hit the ball not as far using the ball the pros might use in the future kind of upsets them. And I can understand that point. I think a valid counterpoint too, and this is one I've brought up, is that, and we talked about this yesterday actually, that we've learned so much about biomechanics. We've learned so much about training. We've created golfers that have chased distance as a skill, not necessarily something you were just born with, that you could figure out and get better at. I mean, think about Matt Fitzpatrick. He got, 10, 15 yards longer and won a U.S. Open because he knew he needed to do it. So it's not necessarily just something that you're born with. It is a developable, it's a trainable skill. And I think that's fair to say. But we also know how to deliver the golf club better. We know how to maximize and be most efficient as possible thanks to TrackMan and other launch monitor data. We have strokes gained data that is tracked by every single shot on the PGA Tour, or almost every single shot. And that data tells us it's better to be longer. It's better to be longer and in the rough more often than being in the fairway and shorter. So the approach to golf has changed because we know what we've seen forever is true. We knew Jack Nicklaus was the longest. He didn't have to be the straightest. We knew Tiger was one of the longest. He didn't have to be the straightest all the time because that was the key to success. Banging it down there, keeping it in play, and then doing everything else. Well, now everybody knows that. That's not something you can erase from people's memories like Men in Black. It's not going anywhere. Golfers are still going to know that at an elite level and at a recreational level. So they're still going to want to chase distance. And that's one piece of it. I think another valid criticism is that the equipment standard that the USGA has come up with isn't necessarily universal. You could launch it 12 or 13 degrees instead, and it might still fly farther. You might be able to come up with a shaft that could deliver slightly lower spinning speeds and spin on the golf ball and perform better. There's going to be a lot of stuff that the OEMs are going to try to do to work around this, and I think Mike Wan acknowledged that they might beat it, and then in 12 or 15 or 20 years, we can have this discussion all over again. That is totally possible. But to me, the intrigue is in what happens next. PGA Tour put out a statement and said, we have seen the changes, we've seen the proposal, we will talk about it with our players, with our sponsors, we'll get feedback from our fans, and then we'll decide what we're going to do. We've seen, obviously, the OEMs that we talked about, they've issued some statements. I'm very curious to hear what the majors have to say about this. Because for a long time, people theorized, and I've been one of them, that Augusta National could come up with their own ball. That they could force players to play, or give them some choices, and create effectively a Masters tournament ball. The US Open could do the same. The Open Championship could do the same. The PGA Championship could do the same. PGA Tour could do it. They could choose to not follow it all, and then you have two very different standards. You could have Liv say, you can just play all the golf balls that are on the shelf now. You can play them. Hell, you can play the Polara golf ball that flies straight and violates the USGA rules. We don't care. They can come up with that standard. So I'm very curious if there will be a universal acceptance of this. If the PGA Tour comes along and says, well, we don't want to buy into this, guess what they just got themselves into? The equipment standard game. Because now they have to measure against the existing equipment standard because the USGA may or may not do it for them. So that may be something they don't want to necessarily do. They could come along and say, well, for the PGA Tour champions, we're going to use the old standard, and for the PGA Tour, we use the new standard. They could do that. You could have each of the majors have their own ball. There used to be a time, not that long ago, where there was the small ball at the Open Championship and everywhere else was the big ball. We've had standards that featured multiple different iterations of possible balls over the years. So, and the game was fine. It was totally okay. Equipment standards have changed over time. I was tweeting out a story, I was looking for something else, and found a New York Times story from 1986 talking about the equipment standards of the USGA and how golf ball manufacturers at the time, the two biggest were Titleist and Spalding, and Wilson was third, how times change. How they were chasing distance using dimples, and how they were trying to figure out with dimple patterns how to hit the ball farther. Well, the distance standard then was just under 300 yards. Now it's 317 plus 3, so it's 320 yards. So standards have changed. They've increased. Well, they can take them back. They can push them forward. They can do these different things, and they've set the precedent for it. Golf has worked out. It's been the same. But for an amateur player who might be upset about this or might feel like some kind of connection they have to professional golf is changing, my argument to you would be, one, you probably don't swing fast enough for this to impact you either way. If we came up with a blanket rollback and said everybody has to roll back every golf ball to these new conditions, most 95% at least of amateur players wouldn't even notice a difference because they play any ball they can find. They're not well fit to the ball that they play now. They don't hit it far enough and they don't swing fast enough to have any kind of impact on any kind of rollback at the high end. This will be a sliding scale kind of thing. So if you swing it above 120 miles per hour, and there are 27 players on the PGA Tour who do that right now, at least based on measurements the Tour's made so far this season, those guys will be impacted more closer to that 15 yards than someone who swings at 115 or 110, who might see a 9-10 yard difference off the driver. And that's not going to be every shot, right? So not every club is as efficient as the driver. So you might see 3 or 4 yards difference on iron shots. You might see a yard or two difference on a wedge shot. And all that stuff will add up over 70, 72 shots, but it's not going to be 15 yards a shot. So at the end of the day, it's probably 5-6 yards a shot, which means 400 yards worth of difference. Does that seem like worth going all this for? That's up to you to decide. To me, I think it is. I think it is worth it. I think it's worth making this change. I think it's a change that should have made long ago. But that we're getting there now, I think is important. And I have to give a lot of credit to Mike Wan, particularly, who stepped into this role as USGA CEO, took over this mantle for Mike Davis, who said he wants to roll back the ball. And he believed in the conviction of his people. He believed in the conviction of this argument and did it. Did something that, frankly, is not going to be widespread popular. Whether people think they should have gone farther or they shouldn't have done it at all. This is not a popular decision, but Mike Wan believes in it. And as a guy who has done a whole lot in the sport, particularly the LPGA side, for him to come over to the USGA and have frankly a transformative impact on equipment rules potentially. I think that's something that's noteworthy. Whether you like it or not, that's noteworthy that someone has that kind of conviction is willing to do it. He could have scrapped the plans. He could have said, we're not doing this. Now's not the time. Golf's increasing in popularity. Why shake the boat at all? But he said, no, I believe in what this says. We're going to try to do this, and we're going to try to figure this out. Now starts the fun part of how everyone reacts to it, whether there's going to be legal challenges. Do manufacturers get on board? Do tours get on board? Do majors get on board? There's a lot to find out still, and this is the beginning of a long-running thing that might not even start in January 1st, 2026. But at a minimum, we got a long way to go until then. So lots more eventually to come over the next several years on this front. Okay, hopefully that did it for you. Hopefully that explained everything as best humanly possible and was helpful over the course of 25 minutes worth of time. I'm sure there's going to be more about this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. I did an interview today with David Duval, the former Open champion, former Players champion. It just happened to be coincidental today. We were going to talk about the Gallery Classic on the PGA Tour Champions. They're going back to where the LPGA's first major used to be, which is now the Chevron Championship in Texas, but Mission Hills is now a Champions Tour venue. We were just scheduled to talk today anyway. We talked about this. I can tell you very clearly he has the very opposite viewpoint that I have about this. So it's a conversation you might want to have or hear about. That'll be available on my podcast, the 19th Hole Golf Show. It'll be available on Golf News Net Radio if you want to listen to that too, and it'll be available online as well. But tomorrow we'll be back. We'll talk about Valspar. We'll talk a little bit about anything else that comes up out of this today. And there's no shortage of news in golf. If nothing else, we got plenty of content to work with, so that's good news. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the show. If you listened, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps us reach more people. If you watch us on YouTube, consider subscribing to our channel. Smash that like button, leave a comment, all those good things that help the algorithm. And we'll be back with another show tomorrow. I'm Ryan Ballingy. Thank you for watching or listening. We will talk to you next time on 2 Off the First.